Welcome everyone to today's presentation from Spot by NetApp and DZone on FinOps Unveiled, optimizing AWS containers for performance and cost efficiency. My name is Corey Knowles. I'm the managing editor of IT at Technology Advice, and I will be your moderator today. We are super excited to be joined by Sean Harris and Natalia Godunov. Sean is a developer relations lead at Spot by NetApp, and Natalia is a solutions architect at AWS. In today's talk, they'll be discussing how to confidently optimize your AWS containers. Just a quick note, though, a little housekeeping. We will have a Q&A session toward the end today. So as we're going, feel free to drop questions in the chat so we have them ready to go when we get there. But now, please join me in welcoming Sean Harris and Natalia Godunov.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to our attendees today. My name is Sean Harris. I sit in the office of the CTO at NetApp, where I am the CloudOps Developer Experience Lead. Basically, I come from a practitioner background after about 20 years, and now I get to talk about cool tech and how NetApp can help solve problems that engineers are facing today. So what we're going to discuss today is how we architect for containers using platforms like Kubernetes and other orchestration platforms, and why architecting for cost and performance is an important thing that we need to keep in mind. Why observability is today's strongest buzzword, but why it needs to be included in your architecture. Strategies for containerization, and then FinOps for containers. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end with some key takeaways. So like was stated by Corey, if you have questions, thoughts, please pop them into the chat. The Q&A section, we'll address them as we go along, but also if you see questions, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So let's start with how the cloud changed the way we work. Across several eras in the age of data, NetApp has led in data infrastructure innovation. But there have been two big themes playing out across these eras. The first is the nature and importance of the data that we work with and manage has increased dramatically. For many organizations today, data is truly the lifeblood of your business. It provides huge opportunity to deliver new values. And for some companies, it actually is their business. And every organization needs to start thinking of their data estate as an actual product that you manage. Then we consider infrastructure changes. When we think of infrastructure, we usually think of physical systems that we run and manage, but now with the cloud, we need to change that mindset and approach infrastructure as everything that runs in your own data centers and what your workloads are running across one cloud or even multiple clouds. That means our data estate and our infrastructure estates need to be holistically thought of as being unified. For NetApp, it did start with storage and unified storage. And then several years ago, we told you the world would be hybrid multi-cloud. Anticipating that, we started on a mission to ensure that we're delivering the data fabric to help your business manage your data across any environment with performance and simplicity. Whether your data is on-prem, in one of the public clouds, or a combination of those, we wanted to become the only vendor to natively embed our technology in all three. And we became the only vendor to natively embed our technology in all three of the major cloud providers. Today, your needs for data management have expanded with requirements for privacy, protection, governance, and adapting to new regulations. The need to support dynamic workloads like AI initiatives, cloud native, open source applications, and the need for observability, optimization, and automation are increasingly distributed, dynamic, and not even reliant on your infrastructure anymore. There's a need to use this intelligence to build on and expand this data fabric. And it starts with breaking down silos and harnessing the power of observability and AI-powered data services to enable the best data management at scale. And as you can see on this slide here in 2015, it started all with helping people figure out how to use EC2 Spot instances. Then in 2020, when the world changed almost overnight, we were forced to all become cloud companies. Post-acquisition by NetApp, Spot has become the mainstay of the NetApp CloudOps portfolio, helping companies move and manage their cloud at scale and non-cloud workloads with an entire portfolio dedicated to ensuring that your infrastructure and your data is available when you need it, how you need it, and where you need it. And now we expand that to bring a unified management backplane for the entire cloud native operations solutions, including your hybrid data centers, your best-in-class storage, and using AI and ML to make automation for your workloads easier at scale. Right now, the biggest challenge that we have when we address the cloud is the inefficiencies of our infrastructure. We see repeatedly that we're not using the virtual machines and the investments that we put into the cloud estate as highly as they would be as we were managing them on-prem, which means we need to change that mindset. Also, with that change in mindset comes the amount of resources that we actually can use. This includes using up to 80 or 90% or even higher of your CPU usage, as well as requesting as well as the memory on board of these virtual machines. Kubernetes users can specify these requests to ensure that containers will have access to a minimum amount, but data has shown that these requests are often higher than needed. In fact, over 65% of Kubernetes-based workloads are utilizing half of the requested CPU and memory. This shows how challenging it can be to right-size your workloads. And our customers have told us that they will often choose to over-provision resources for their containerization efforts, despite the additional costs, as a way to ensure that their applications stay online and available so that their workloads keep running. Organizations are running into these challenges due to a lack of compatible or available cost optimization tools. A VPA or a vertical pod autoscaler is the Kubernetes feature that recommends what your containers and CPU will request from their CPU and memory, and limits based on their past resource usage. However, as we've been working in this space, we find that less than 1% of Kubernetes organizations actually use the VPA, and even fewer use it correctly. This number has remained flat since we last looked at VPA adoption in 2021. And we suspect that this is due to the fact that this feature is still in beta and has certain limitations. Right now, you can't use a horizontal pod. You can't use your VPA alongside your horizontal pod autoscaler, which is scaling out to actually increase the nodes and the CPU cores and memory, as opposed to using them more efficiently. And over half of these organizations that aren't using VPA are using an HPA. So they're scaling out their infrastructure horizontally and adding nodes and cores, but they're not getting that maximum utilization that we're seeing. And as they look to reduce their cloud bill without reducing their cloud footprint, more and more cost optimization solutions become available. We expect to see the increased adoption of Kubernetes resource utilization. That make it easier to identify these workloads and identify resources that are being used inefficiently. But with this growth comes the control of expenses, either real or perceived. And organizations are constantly trying to balance this fine line between their cloud infrastructure needs versus cloud infrastructure costs. And in the report that we've linked below from Datadog and Flexera, the biggest three challenges that people responded to was understanding what their infrastructure dependencies were, assessing what those what the cost impact would be, and identifying the technical feasibility. And Natalia, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, but
yes, and I'm back. I'm not sure how it all started because I didn't have a chance to introduce myself, right? So we will have a little bit of discussion here now. Regarding the reports that you mentioned, like I wanted to sort of reiterate that as well, that, you know, with economic pressure increasing across the world, now a lot of the organizations are leaning on their FinOps teams to prioritize cloud optimization. And yeah, another also report that I wanted to mention is the latest State of FinOps report shows that this year top priority for organizations of all sizes, you know, across all industries, that the priority for them is reducing waste and unused resources. So this means that efficiency is effectively high on the list of priorities. So that kind of reiterates your point. And yeah, thank you for that.
From your point of view at AWS, where you get to see a unique aspect of how people use their cloud estate and their infrastructure, do you see that users inside of AWS kind of fit within these metrics that Flexera and Datadog found, that they're not, that these resources are being highly underutilized?
I can definitely say from personal experience and from speaking to other people from the field, like other technical account managers, solution architects, that is true. That's the case. So when we talk to customers about cloud optimization, the first thing that we see is that customers are not using their resources efficiently, regardless really of the type of technology or the infrastructure that they have. But they provision too much, they over provision, they don't often have a proper kind of benchmarking processes before either going into the cloud or launching their workloads, which ends up in over provisioning in the end. And they also have a lot of waste, so they end up paying for the resources that they don't need. So that's what we see a lot. Yeah.
And that brings up a good point. How does AWS define waste? Because different organizations in their FinOps practice define waste differently. Like I know at Spot we have a very defined definition of how we identify waste. How does AWS look at waste, and where do you advise customers to actually start looking for those inefficiencies to start that optimization journey?
So the way how we define it, so we kind of look at it in from the best practices perspective. Like for example, like how it's described in the cost optimization pillar in the well-architected framework. I hope a lot of people watching this are familiar with well-architected. So it's effectively the resources that you don't need and resources that don't bring any business value. So it might have been something that you were doing for testing and you forgot to shut that down. So those resources are not bringing any actual value to the business. So effectively that's waste, at least from the cost perspective. We can, of course, talk about another angle like sustainability, but I think, today we look at it from the FinOps and cost perspective. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks for that. And I also wanted to kind of touch on the topic, like how do we approach this from the AWS side? So sometimes customers ask us when we talk about cost optimization and when we tell our customers that, we want you to be running efficiently, and they sometimes ask, isn't it kind of counterintuitive? Why are we saying that we want our customers to pay less? But the idea of it's not about really paying less. It's about achieving the most value from each dollar spent on AWS. So we want our customers to be able to achieve that value from the resources that they are running. And this is where we are trying to kind of connect technology, people and processes, or rather technical teams and business teams together to find that common ground where you can deliver the right technical tools or processes to achieve the right business outcomes. And last year, if you like to watch the keynotes from reInvent, and specifically Dr. Werner Vogel's keynotes, his keynotes are one of my favorites. He often likes to talk about simple concepts in a kind of thought-provoking way. So last year he introduced us to this concept of the frugal architect. Cost is typically one of the first reasons why people move to the cloud quickly, because you don't have to lay out the capital up front for the servers and data centers, and you instead get to pay for for the resources in the cloud as you consume them. So in AWS, you can just provision what you need, and then if it turns out that you don't need it, then you can sort of give back that capacity to us and stop paying for it. The idea of this frugal architect is that this person, let's say this frugal architect, knows how to design cost-aware, sustainable, and modern applications, and knows how to make the right architectural trade-offs. So whether it's about choosing services, whether it's about selecting the features that you want to implement, or whether it's generally about your cloud infrastructure. So being the frugal architect means that you shouldn't be compromising on performance or security or availability, but you also should build workloads in such a way that cost is also one of your non-functional requirements. So this is what this is sort of the premises of our session today, and we will be talking about FinOps, and hopefully this loss of the frugal architect will resonate with many of our attendees today. Now, Sean, back to you. Tell us more about success with FinOps.
Well, let's talk about driving success with FinOps. FinOps is a new word that everybody seems to be coalescing around, right? But what does FinOps really mean? It's the same. It's similar to DevOps, and it's that collaboration and alignment with the business and ensuring that success. And so, in this little diagram here, we've taken things that, especially me in my practitioner role, and I'm sure Natalia, you've heard the same comments from the business. It's taking too long to do X. How can we make it faster? How can we do more with our cloud? And the question that we always have as architects is, how can we respond better to the needs of the business and be better partners to the business? And we see these requirements on the right of the things that are important to the business team, the finance team, the infosec team, and the development teams. And then how do we turn those requirements into these important cloud applications, right? And these platforms for both FinOps and operation and infrastructure automation and driving your DevOps practice go hand in hand, and we have to use that same mindset. It would be great if customers came to us and said, hey, how can you help us with platform engineering, because we don't know where to start. But that's rarely the case. A lot of the companies that I interact with, and I'm sure Natalia, you see the same, move to the cloud out of necessity, and they aren't sure where to get started. And then they will ask us that, or how do we introduce them to the Spot platform as a concept, right? How do we take some of these large infrastructure challenges and make them so bite-sized that, make it easy to manage your cloud better? It takes too long from the time that it's coded to get deployed. How do I make it go faster? When somebody bought a bunch of random savings plans, but they weren't sure how they were going to work, can I move them around the rest of my estate, right? These are all questions that we have to address when it comes into our infrastructure, especially as we're moving to microservices and containerization to keep that velocity that we have. And managing our cloud budget, right? The more that we spend in the cloud and the more infrastructure that we provision, that's less on-prem stuff that we have to manage. How do we translate that? And then it comes down to security. And so acceleration and working and driving success with FinOps includes making sure that we're meeting these requirements and that we're all working together to know what our cloud is doing, where it's doing it, and why it's doing it. And by doing that, we free up a backlog of minutia and boring stuff that you don't want to pay your cloud engineering team to do. You've hired these talented cloud engineers to come in and drive business and innovate and do cool things, not to spin up servers by hand and make sure that their Kubernetes pods are stacked correctly. So driving cloud success begins with FinOps, and success with FinOps begins with operationalizing a FinOps practice in your organization that encompasses your whole cloud estate, your cloud development, your cloud deployments, and your day-to-day cloud infrastructure.
Yes, one question I wanted to ask on that. In your experience, or what would you say, the customers that you worked with, which customers implement these best practices better? Those who migrated to the cloud and then started refactoring, re-architecting, or those who are born on the cloud, or maybe specific industry, like any kind of example of like a specific subset of customers that you'd say are doing it better than others?
I think the cloud native drivers have been some of the biggest when it comes to taking FinOps and having a FinOps center of excellence, a FinOps practice, similar to what some of the big names in DevOps have done. But I think the other industry, you asked for an industry example, I think retail had to get it together really quick, because retail and SaaS-driven applications, and that's for two reasons. We talk about how back in 2020, when the world shut down one day in March, we didn't know what was going to happen, and these companies were forced to scale. And we saw this with Zoom, especially when they became the backbone and as ubiquitous as the word Google in our industry, because Zoom is where everybody was meeting. It's where we were doing everything, and they had scaling problems and they had to wrap their heads not only around the scaling challenges, but around the cost challenges as well. How do you control cost when you're having to scale that fast? How do you take cost into account? Do you put it by the wayside? You know, that slide that you meant earlier, that you had earlier, this frugal laws of the architect, the one that always stands out to me is law number 3. The architecting is always a series of trade-offs.
Yeah,
How do we
100%.
take those trade-offs and make it so that we're taking the business needs into account and making those trade-offs in a way? Can we forget about FinOps for a while? I argue that you can't, because if you're not controlling your cost, it's going to get out of hand really quick. And so retail and SaaS native applications are the ones that have kind of driven this, and the cloud native web 3.0 companies, the ones that have embraced DevOps from their early days, are the ones that are leading how FinOps is being implemented. And as bigger companies operationalize it and it becomes part of their day-to-day accounting standards and accounting practices, you're seeing that grow out from that sphere of influence. What about you? Where do you see that kind of
yeah, same
happening?
in terms of like I'd say small and medium businesses or kind of digital native businesses, those that were pretty much born on the cloud, they just adopt these practices faster. It's more difficult for enterprises, especially when they are trying to do lift and shift from the data centers, mostly because they are trying to do lift and shift, and they just do it to the best of their abilities and knowledge, and they want to move quickly, right? So moving quickly is their main requirement. So they typically move fast, and then they think about optimization later. So, and this is where it becomes a bit difficult to kind of optimize post factum. So ideally, you know, if you do it right, we want to implement some of those foundational practices from the start. And speaking about some of those foundational practices, so we are getting closer to the topic of the actual containers. I think on the next slide, something that I wanted to cover is regarding kind of giving team visibility of their cost and showcasing, you know, what their actions mean in terms of dollar value. So whatever they implement, whatever actions they do in the console or, you know, programmatically, whatever they run in the accounts, like how exactly it translates onto the bill. So this is a question that everyone asks, and very often what happens, a lot of AWS customers will look at their bill maybe like once a month, and they will then try to interpret that bill. Sometimes they will look at these figures like, oh, this is how much I spent per each individual account or per each service. But then when you bring this information to finance or business teams, saying like, this is how much we spent on RDS or DynamoDB or EC2, it doesn't really mean much for them. They speak in different terms. They want to know, for example, cost by application or cost by workload or cost by team, to tie it in back to the budget if teams have specific budget, right? So those are more kind of meaningful ways of presenting cost to the business. And this is where we kind of lean in on this concept of tagging and cost allocation. And specifically in the container space, like it's been quite a challenge for, I'd say, many years, where there wasn't enough granularity, or at least from AWS side, we didn't provide enough granularity to the data or to the information on how, what exactly is running in your containers workloads. And now we have these additional features, and one of them, I'll just give an example, the split cost allocation data feature that allows you to tag all of the resources inside your container environments in AWS, which is later presented in the detailed reports, like cost and usage reports or data experts, if some people are familiar with a new version of cost and usage report. So all of this detailed information with like tagged resources and kind of tagged tasks and pods, depending on which container service you use, it cannot now be presented in the cost and usage data, which can later be brought to the individual teams to show back, you know, whatever they are doing, which impact it has on the bill. So this is where we encourage both sort of business teams and individual development teams to kind of come together to understand these requirements for viewing their cost and usage data, and then connecting the dots by using the right tools for providing the visibility of this data to the right stakeholders at the right time. Since I already kind of touched on the topic of containers, so let's just briefly mention what we have from AWS side.
There, guys.
Yeah, do you have any questions?
I have one question for you before you get into this. And so, as AWS has put a big effort into FinOps and helping companies better understand. I remember when I first started in the cloud, I worked for a company where I and my team were brought in to help bring DevOps to an organization. And one thing that I had to do the first 5 days of every month was pick one day to sit down and go through 17 different AWS accounts and figure out that chargeback. And you've put these icons up on this slide here, the cost per application, the cost per workload, the cost per team or department, and how profitable is it. Mm-hmm. I had to put these all into a worksheet and go to each organization member because we didn't know what FinOps was, right? We talk about how DevOps drove FinOps, and we didn't know how there was a better way to do that. And now AWS has automated this. What was from your point of view, where you work for AWS and you get to work with cost optimization, how do you guys develop these tools? Do you guys just watch trends and say, hey, maybe we should put this into our reporting? This is something that customers would find useful? Or is it stuff that AWS found useful and figures would help their users be more successful?
So about, I don't remember exactly the percentage, but somewhere between 90 and 95% of all of our services and features are launched and created and developed because our customers asked for it. So there's obviously, as you can imagine, there's a long process from the time that customers ask for it and until it actually sees the light of day. But throughout that process, we gather information and feedback from a lot of other customers. So our product teams, they talked to field teams like solution architects and technical account managers, sales teams who talk directly to customers. They ask for feedback, for input from other customers, different sizes, different industries. They will have some interviews with some customers to gather more data about the specific functionality. And then the development process happens. But the bottom line is that it all comes from the customer feedback. So, like for example, if any of the customers would be interested to see a specific feature or a specific improvement, they should probably the best way to go about it is to reach out to the account team. It's likely that you will be working with somebody like an account manager or again solution architect from AWS on this, and you can provide your feedback, and this will go directly to our product teams. So we have mechanisms around that, and that's how it happens.
We're about halfway through our webcast,
yeah.
And if you're listening, and we'd love to hear what challenges you guys are having around these topics, right? If it's FinOps, if it's figuring out services, just kind of pop into the chat if you're feeling so inclined about what your biggest top 1 to 2, 3, maybe 3 issues are in your organization. We'd love for this to be a very interactive presentation so that we can talk about things that are important to you, because we realize your time is valuable. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Natalia.
Yes, thank you. So we kind of touched on the topic of FinOps and the importance of having that collaboration between business and technical teams. So we had a little bridge into the cost allocation topic, and I think from there we probably need to get closer to containers, because that's what we are here for, to talk a bit more about containers. So I wanted to highlight specifically from AWS side. I know people probably heard jokes about, many ways of running containers on AWS. We've heard those jokes around, but I'd say here maybe I want to focus on 2 main biggest kind of services that we have in AWS portfolio around containers, which is ECS, Elastic Container Service, and EKS, Kubernetes. And to talk a little bit about those and what are the features. And again, I'd be curious to know from the audience what is their experience with the service, or especially when it comes to kind of monitoring the cost or doing any sort of cost allocation or understanding whether they are wasting any resources, for example, maybe they are over provisioning something. So yeah, just on a high level about these two services. So for example, the ECS service, the Elastic Container Service that we have on AWS, it's like the one of our original container services that we launched. It's focusing on native AWS experience and for people who might not be familiar with Kubernetes, for example, it could be a good start. So it's highly integrated with a lot of other AWS services, like IAM, for example, or other services that you can think of in terms of when you have to like develop your workload on AWS and connect those services together. So there is a simplicity to run it at scale, and there are certain, like for example, like there are certain service quotas, service limits on ECS where you can run 5,000 services per cluster. And then you can also run about like 5,000 tasks per service. So it adds up to quite a lot within just one kind of set of containers that you can run on ECS. So we say that from ECS perspective, there's simplicity there. It's easy to manage and operate. So effectively create a cluster. It's made up of ECS tasks. It's sort of like tasks are the smallest unit within ECS, and it can consist up to 10 containers. There's no control plane to manage or any kind of concept of like master cluster or something like that. You can use the auto-scaling group, and pricing is based just solely on the compute. Like there are two kind of launch types. You can either run it on EC2 instances or you can run it on Fargate. So Fargate is like a serverless, let's just say it's like a serverless version where you pay for like a vCPU and memory that you provision. And with EC2, a lot of people are probably familiar with EC2. You just run, for the hours that you are running the EC2 instance. While with EKS, so one good thing that we are sort of quite proud about is like the whole integration with the open source and the open source landscape that's available. However, like from cost perspective on EKS, there is a managed control plane. It is considered like a managed service, so you don't have to worry about managing the control plane. It's something that's done on AWS side. However, there is a charge for that. So there is like a fixed charge, I think 10 cents per hour per cluster. And it's also regardless of the size of the cluster. So I think it adds up something like $72 per month per cluster. So it's important how exactly you're managing and optimizing those resources within the cluster. So if you are able to have less clusters, then you'll pay less for like the control plane side of things. And yet you obviously don't want to over provision your resources within those clusters. And similarly, like with ECS, you can run it either on Fargate or on EC2, similar pricing there. If you, let's say, run EC2 instances, then you pay for those EC2 instances as they run every hour. So that's kind of the main differentiators. Well, from differentiators perspective, like I guess, there are certain ways how you would decide whether you would go with one or another. I'd say the main one will be it will really depend on like whether you're familiar with Kubernetes or not. And yet there are a lot of users, a lot of customers who are not very familiar with it and they want to get into container space. So they often go with ECS as this is kind of the AWS native containers option. So this is like the landscape that we have from like the full-on, full features containers services on AWS. And I believe that we will later talk a bit on what Sean will have some other advice on like what exactly, how are you managing this on your side, right?
Yeah. How do you, with the multiple services, and let's talk about ECS versus EKS specifically. I've seen a lot of customers that start with ECS, and in my experience, once they get comfortable with containerization, then they move to EKS. Do you guys see the same thing over at AWS from your customers as well, or am I just seeing anomalies in that space?
It happens. I I'm not sure I have like enough context to say whether it's like at a large scale. I've seen customers that do that. One reason is more like when they get people more skilled with, Kubernetes, like this is when they go with the EKS option. Yeah, I guess simple answer is that it happens, but yeah, I can't really tell what's really the scale of this. But we also have plenty customers like staying with ECS.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I have like a specific rule other than like the familiarity with the technology and how customers decide to select. Well, I guess it also depends on the actual management. So I'm not sure if it's, it's not necessarily the architecture choice question. It's more like, what do you do after you deploy it? So depending on how you want to manage the life cycle of your containers, then you might decide whether it would be ECS or EKS. One example is like networking. One important thing to consider is networking. Let's say with ECS, it's relatively easy to manage the networking bit because it supports multiple networking models. Like let's say it's supporting dynamic port mapping, where you can have like one private IP in the VPC subnet, and you can run like multiple tasks, throughout. Just using with that one like private IP on the container itself. While with EKS, there's like a requirement, and it's more like a Kubernetes thing. So it's using private IPs that are attached to like specific pods. So like that's one aspect that you would consider then later from like management perspective. Or then also like upgrades. So for ECS, because there's no really control plane, you don't have to worry about upgrades. While with EKS, every more or less 3 months, I'd say you'd have to think about like upgrading to a new version, which for some customers find challenging if they have like large estate of their containers, as they don't have like correct kind of processes to do this at scale. So those are some considerations.
Yeah. One of the questions we have in the Q&A right now is from one of our viewers, and it says, one of the challenges we have experienced is in modernizing our legacy on-prem VMs based to container-based. What are some best practices around assessing the right sizing provisioning on a cloud basis, the current capacity planning? Typically, we struggle to draw the parallel before going to production, as we need some iteration before going to production to a level of, say, 70 to 80% accuracy. Ram, that's a great question, and we're going to address it here in a couple of slides. I'm not going to answer it right now,
yeah,
but we're going to address it here in a couple of slides because we're going to talk about that exact problem.
Great, yeah. I think this is the sort of the last slide that we have, where we can have like a little discussion around optimization techniques and how we can go about optimizing the way we use containers. So I think the first one is regarding visibility. So from AWS side, like as I said, so we can kind of provide you the tools, and it's ultimately up to the customer to choose, which tools they use and how exactly they establish that cost-aware culture in the organization, like which stakeholders are supposed to be seeing which information, and which kind of metrics that they decide to track throughout those visibility tools. And so, Sean, any thoughts from your side?
I think the ones that stand out to me are visibility, because, and as we said on this slide a couple backs, and I'm going to reiterate throughout this, you can't control what you can't see. So you have to have visibility into your estate. That means visibility down to the namespace level. And for those of you that are struggling getting the VMs to a namespace, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then standards, right? You are, as cloud architects, we set the standards for what our architecture should be. And we need to be very proactive in setting those standards. We need to be very proactive in defining and setting guardrails for our development teams to make sure that they're calling the right services for the right sized workloads. So that no longer can we just go and say, developers, go throw your code into the cloud and provision. We have to control that. And then that iteration that we talked about, right? And Brown mentioned it in his question, right? You have to go through some iteration before you can get to that 70 to 80% accuracy and really explore the benefits of using the cloud in an optimized way. But I think that slide talks about everything that from that FinOps perspective, but also from that infrastructure perspective, containerization and choosing those platforms can be really hard if you don't have the right advisor to go with it and say, this is what we're seeing. So AWS and Spot by NetApp, who Natalia is from AWS, I'm from Spot by NetApp. We've partnered together to talk about this important thing, right? And what does Spot by NetApp do at the end of the day? And because most of us hear NetApp and they go, NetApp, the storage company? What are you doing in the cloud? So we talk about that unified infrastructure vision at the beginning. And here's what it looks like. What Spot by NetApp does is we make your cloud infrastructure easy to manage, optimize, and automate. We meet you where you are on your cloud ops journey. And by doing that, we've partnered with AWS. We're a board member of the FinOps Foundation, and we're one of the FinOps certified platforms. FinOps certified platforms for cost management, right? And we take all of these things like we saw on the other one, on the other slide previously, and basically take these business requirements and put them into these silos and make products that are built to do this. You can't measure what you cannot see. So do you have the right visibility? Do your downstream teams have that same visibility? Do you have a data sprawl where people don't know what's going on, right? How do you do the reporting and charge back and sometimes even shame back to people that
we don't like shaming, at least not in AWS.
But I think shameback's a real thing, and you bring up a good point, right? And shameback is a real thing because if we don't approach it correctly, it does turn from chargeback and showback into shameback.
Well, we like to do it more like as a gamification.
Right.
So the way how we encourage our customers to implement it is, there could be a healthy level of competition, right? So, but instead of like shameback, rather, encourage people who are doing it right or who are implementing those best practices. Maybe create some sort of gamified type of dashboards to provide examples like how other teams in your own organization are doing it. So yeah, I'd say that's how we would go about it.
And at the end of the day, we want to start with we want to make the most money with the lowest possible effort. And so we want to automate the most impactful operations of your cloud teams and make it and automate the one that's not worth that effort, right? Sitting there trimming out and auditing your auto scaling group rules is not an effective use of your time for your cloud engineers. And so with that gamification, with that accountability, with that idea of building a cloud center of excellence, FinOps has to be a part of it. And we help you do that at Spot by NetApp. And how do we do that? We ensure that you only pay for what you need. Without Spot, and we can see this on the left-hand side, we tend to take into account that over provisioning that we mentioned earlier. It's easier to stack a bunch of instances that I might not be using fully, costs be left out the window because I want to make sure my infrastructure stays online. So we use a lot of on-demand instances, and a lot of them are homogeneous. We go and we pick the C5 4XLs and we stack everything of the same C4 5XLs or C5 4XLs. And so we use this blend of on-demand instances, but you can see our demand curve kind of ebbs and flows. So if I'm utilizing a demand curve that uses the compute functions of these blue blocks, I'm leaving all these servers, and think of each block as its own little server, underutilized or completely unutilized in some cases. And so that's inefficient. And so with Spot, what we do is we do app-driven provisioning, and we use AI and ML to identify what your workload is doing when it's doing it. And then we go and find you the best blend of instance mixes, which means sometimes it will be running on Spot instances, making sure that we're burning down your reserved instances and service plans and savings plans correctly, ensuring that they're getting that utilization and making sure that we've got the right blend at the right time. Because those reserved instances save you money, Spot instances save you even more, and we can stack your infrastructure to meet that demand curve so that you're getting what you need, when you need it, where you need it. And this applies to compute, this applies to your Kubernetes cluster, to your Kubernetes environment, down to your reserved instances for your open source databases with our InstaCluster product. Did you have something you want to add on that slide,
I just
Natalia?
wanted to say that I really like seeing, this graphs here, the way how you displayed it, because we often talk about scalability of the cloud, right? Where when customers move to the cloud, it effectively removes the need of this excess capacity that you have to order, let's say, for your own data centers. However, it's true that even though a lot of customers are going to the cloud, they actually do not necessarily utilize that scalability. AWS loves working together with partners on filling in any of the gaps basically complementing any of the tools that we have on AWS side as well. So I like seeing this here where, you kind of filling in the need that was there, where you're even reducing that gap that, a lot of customers had when they, for example, migrated to AWS and they keep over provisioning and they are still running in this data center like mentality. So to me, at least from what I can tell, it looks like that. This looks much more scalable.
Right. And one of the hardest things is managing those spot instances, right?
Yeah.
And how do one of the things that Spot has really done is since we're founded in 15, so let's put ourselves in the role of the platform engineer. What do I need to provide? How do I start my optimization? How do I make sure that my infrastructure is where I need it? So beginning in 2015, we started gathering data of the spot market and what was available on these spot instances. And people look at us and said, I'm going to run production workloads on spot instances. Do not think so. But with Spot, you can do that because we are able to do predictive rebalancing based on the metrics from your containerized and virtual machine workloads. We can predict down to 95% accuracy how long you're going to have that instance, and we can prepare for that instance to be taken back without impacting your infrastructure. This data-driven automation of scaling, monitoring, and governance across deployments, across your teams, accounts, and even your cloud estates. And that means and by being able to predict those interruptions, that means you stay online easier. And you can run containers without managing the infrastructure. We go back to that previous slide there, but we have the spot instances here in pink. And that means we're using those instances. And then what we're doing is we're watching each pod, no matter where your control plane is, no matter what cloud you're in, to do pod-driven auto-scaling and bin packing. And bin packing is the idea of if I can save you money by putting you on a different sized instance or a different even instance family that better meets your needs. And this means multi-SKU, like having some GPU instances versus no GPU instances. We can do all that by watching your workloads and the metrics that come from your workloads with our decision engines. And then we do that continuous pod right sizing. So we can go in and we're continuously watching every 30 seconds, taking those metrics, making sure that your workload is fitting where you need to be. And when it comes to predicting, we can do that as well. NetApp has other tools outside of the Spot platform that are specifically built to watch your on-prem infrastructure. It was previously, up until 2 weeks ago, called Cloud Insights. And Cloud Insights really looked at your on-prem data estate, no matter what your hypervisor was, and your storage estate, and helped you predict with up to 95% accuracy again that infrastructure map that you would need to move to the cloud or to move from the cloud back to your on-prem. So we can do it both ways because the hybrid reality is one that's real. And virtual machines and containerization aren't going anywhere. We're not all moving to serverless functions as fast as we imagined we were going to do back in the early 2010s. And so we've made these tools available to make your journey and data management easier.
Yeah.
So with that, we're coming up on time. We want to make sure that we're leaving some questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So number one, these are the 3 key takeaways that I would recommend. And Natalia, if you have anything you want to add on these, jump in. But make sure that you start incorporating FinOps into your cloud ops and development life cycles, rather than treating cost and usage as an independent variable. We go back to that slide that we had from the Frugal Architect. Architecting is a series of trade-offs, but cost cannot be one of those trade-offs. Do you have anything that you want to add on that one?
Yes, and just wanted to reiterate it that cost should be like a non-functional requirement. Of course, when you're developing anything, probably performance, high availability, resiliency, security will be a top priority. However, you can think about cost at every step of this journey, whether you're designing it, whether you're architecting, the workload, or whether you start building it. Try thinking about doing this in the most efficient way. It's pretty much it should be ideally everyone's job in the organization. It's not just the business and finance stakeholders. Effectively, it just will help deliver more efficient workloads over time, and of course it will align better with the business value, the business outcomes that the company, the organization wants to achieve. And yeah, of course we want technical teams to be on board with this, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other important thing and the key takeaway that I cannot drive home enough: leverage the tooling from AWS and the automation from whatever platform. NetApp builds tools purpose-built for cloud ops and operationalizing your FinOps automation, commitment management, and acquisition, and ensuring the optimization of your workloads. And one thing I didn't highlight enough, I don't think, is the fact that with the commitment management, when you buy a savings plan or a reserved instance, you need to make sure that you're using it correctly. You need to make sure that it's getting used first. And that's what Spot by NetApp's FinOps tools do, is ensure that commitment burn down is being done correctly so that you're not surprised at the end of the year.
Yeah, that's another challenge we see as well with reserve.
Because what happens if I don't use my savings plan, or if I have an EDP that I've negotiated and I've committed to AWS? I'm going to consume a certain amount of AWS services. What happens if I don't meet that from the AWS perspective at the end of the year, Natalia?
Good question.
I have to pay a bill.
Yes, you have to pay the
I've
bill.
agreed.
It's a commitment. Yeah.
Right. I've committed that I'm going to use this, and if I don't burn that commitment down, it's money that I have to ship out to AWS that I potentially didn't need to, because I didn't have that automation and commitment management in my workloads. And then
one thing I'll add from that's the reason, why we have this conversation about architectural trade-offs is we want our customers not to jump into those commitments immediately. We want them to be efficient with how they build and design their applications. First right size, then reserve. Think whether you can run anything on Spot, because that will bring you even more savings, will be even more efficient from cost perspective. And only when you know that you will have something running 24/7 for longer periods of time, where you would be able to get that return on investment from this commitment, then you would be able to reserve it. But as you pointed out correctly, that typically, very often customers will have to do it on their own with tracking the utilization, the coverage. In the past, so currently for EC2, we typically recommend savings plans because they're just much more easier to manage. But with reserved instances, for example, if customers were using convertible reserved instances, they always had to monitor that usage and see whether they are getting the benefit of that discount. So there was certainly some operational overhead for that. So, and this is where, as I said, AWS likes working with partners on filling in any needs to remove that potential operational overhead, and help our customers in that way to free up their time.
Yep. No, and that's a great point. AWS has a vested interest in making sure that you're using your infrastructure to the best of its potential, right? They have a vested interest in making sure that their customers are happy. And the final takeaway, that if you've taken away anything from this presentation, continuous optimization is just as important as continuous integration and continuously delivery are to your DevOps practice and CloudOps practice. FinOps is a journey, not a destination. You don't have to be an expert right now. And with that, we will just kind of close out. I will say that Spot is available in the AWS marketplace. You can start a 30-day commitment-free trial and get started by reading our documents and request an in-depth demo of some of the other tools that I talked about.
Yeah, thank you very much. And from my side, if anyone will be at reInvent, anyone who is watching or listening, there are a few sessions that I put here as a recommendation, but one of them is, which I believe will be very interesting for a lot of people around advanced cost allocation for containers. So I'm running this workshop. It will be a workshop with one of my other colleagues, like specialists on kind of containers and FinOps and cost optimization. We will be sharing some sort of insights on, how to utilize tagging best practices, how to utilize this feature like split cost allocation data to like understand the usage and cost of your containerized workloads. It will be both about ECS and EKS. Though I think I was checking the registration portal, and I think the like pre-booking of the seats is already full for that workshop. So sometimes it happens that we decide to run that workshop again, maybe like later in the week, or walk-ins are always available. But yeah, just wanted to put it out there in case anyone will be at reInvent.
Well, Sean, Natalia, this was super interesting, and we have a few questions here from the audience. I'd like to roll through with you if you don't mind.
All right. Yep.
All right. First, why would I use ECS or EKS?
Oh.
What are some of the differentiations I should consider?
Yeah, I think we briefly mentioned it on that slide where we talked about ECS versus EKS. So there are so from application level perspective, I'd say it doesn't really matter. Like they still deliver the same thing that they need to that you need them to deliver. One thing comes to like skills. Like if people might not be familiar with Kubernetes and they want to start with containers and they are on AWS, start with ECS. Another thing, like I think I mentioned previously, networking bit. So there are some differences there in the way like how you manage private IPs. With ECS, it works a little differently at scale, where with EKS, I think there's like a private IP for each individual pod, and it's just like a Kubernetes thing, which you'd have to manage over time. Yeah, I guess like those are like the biggest, and kind of the management operational overhead side as well. On ECS, there's no control plane, and on EKS, like there is a control control plane. You pay a bit extra for it, and you also need to make sure that you are upgrading, every time like a new version is released. So that's kind of the main things from operational perspective to consider when it comes to management of those two.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we got another here. So my organization is looking at FinOps, but isn't sure where to start. How can I help get this effort going from a technical role?
Set the standards. That's my thing, right? If you are looking at operationalizing FinOps and aren't sure where to start, just remember you're the architect. You have the keys to the cloud.
Keys to optimization, exactly.
Right, and you are the key to optimization. Your accounting team, your finance team is coming back to you and saying, we need to get cost under control, but you're the one that has the keys. We are relying on you. Be that trusted expert and a good partner in your organization, and be the voice of change. Read the FinOps Foundation website, get up to date on the standards, read the well-architected framework for the cost optimization pillar, get to know what those standards are, and that will help you do it very easily.
That's great stuff. That's good to know.
Yep.
We've got just a few more here. Optimization is great, but I am just getting started with Kubernetes. How can AWS or Spot help make Kubernetes easier?
I think our partnership makes it easy, but with the variety of services that AWS has that make it easy, right? ECS or EKS sounds complicated, but at the end of the day, just remember, if you're new to Kubernetes, start with ECS. Learn the concepts. The concepts that
basics,
power ECS are how you're going to manage Kubernetes at scale when you're ready to graduate to Kubernetes, right? Without having to manage the infrastructure, without having to manage the data plane. And Spot can help with that by giving you an idea of your state, right? We have multiple tools for FinOps, Kubernetes, virtual machines. We have the data infrastructure insights that tells you what you need to run in the cloud or on-prem and can help predict those workloads. And so I would say use the tools and work with your provider.
That's good to know. All right.
Great.
Next. So DevOps is all about efficiency and collaboration. How does NetApp and AWS approach this to ensure people are all on the same page, both technically and operationally?
Yeah,
You know that?
I'll just briefly
go ahead.
say that from AWS side, like we work closely with our partners to make sure that we are like aligned with what we are trying to achieve, what we are trying to deliver to our customers. So yeah, if for example Sean has any specific advice from Spot side of things.
I mean, from the Spot side, we've gone out of our way to make a unified dashboard, a single pane of glass that anybody in your organization can log into. We have permissions and everything, of course, but you can log in and easily see what your data estate is in your cloud by cloud provider, by even down to the account and namespace level. You can, and I would say go sign up for a demo, see exactly what you're looking at, and run through a demo and see how it would apply and look at it from those different roles in your organization, because looking at the same, everybody looking and playing from the same playbook is going to make your life easier, and that's what Spot specializes in.
Nice.
Great.
One last one and I'll let you go. My compute is under control, but how can I approach my storage and data estate in the same way and achieve the same cost and infrastructure size savings?
Yeah, from infrastructure perspective and services perspective, we actually have a lot of different resources that can help you like learn how to optimize, like storage, for example. I'll actually link something in the chat. But again, I believe that Sean has another answer from Spot perspective.
I would just say use tools, right? Tooling is going to be important. Understanding what the individual tools from AWS and the data that they're showing you, understand what they're actually telling you, and then approach your storage infrastructure the same way that you do your virtual and compute infrastructure.
Okay. Well, Sean, Natalia, thank you so much. This has been insightful. I've learned a lot today.
Thank you very much for inviting, and apologies for a little situation at the very beginning.
Oh, we survived. We always survive. So please, everyone, go check out Spot by NetApp. We've got all the information up there on the screen. We hope you found today's session to be valuable and informative. If you have any further questions, need more information, reach out or visit the website up above. And thanks for joining. Best of luck on your journey toward better optimization.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.